This video is sponsored by Tactical Tokens, creating awesome monster and player tokens for your RPG game. Check out their Kickstarter in the description below. Hello everybody, Jordan here, the PH is silent. I wanted to talk about the changes from 3.5 to 4th edition and what eventually caused 5th edition. I had a patron ask me why everyone hates on 4E so much. I couldn't give a super great answer, so I did some research to make a video about it. I've played 4E for about 8 months, and I did enjoy my time playing 4th edition, but I see the problems people have with it. This video is mostly my opinions, as there isn't really a definitive book or article on why do people hate D&D 4th edition. Starting off, we have to dip into 3.5 edition for a little bit. 3rd edition came out in 2000. By July 2003, a revised version of 3rd edition came out and was termed 3.5. It incorporated numerous rule changes addressing common complaints about the aspects of gameplay. They made changes to certain spells, but many things like magic items and monsters remain the same. Not everything was changed, and that's why they call it 3.5. They just updated 3rd edition. This was the start of 4th edition. People complaining that the rules weren't clear enough for players and dungeon masters. I'm sure only Wizards knows if these were the loud voices of a few players or the majority of the community. Regardless, I believe it was here that Wizards of the Coast started to see their game as more of a tactical combat game with light role-playing. By 2007, Wizards announced 4th edition, which was then released June 2008. This was early. 3rd edition was now the shortest supported D&D edition, and the rumor was that 4th edition was going to be super different. Another problem that upset players is traditionally Dungeons & Dragons was released in 3 books, a player's handbook, a monster manual, and a dungeon master's guide, but this wasn't the case for 4th edition. With numerous volumes of player handbooks, Wizards of the Coast was encouraging players to pick them all up. I'm sure from their standpoint, more books equals more money, and players wanted more, so it kind of made sense. The game was then also changed drastically to balance Dungeons & Dragons from the ground up, rather than attempt to fix 3.5. Dungeons & Dragons was completely overhauled to resemble a miniature combat game more than a traditional RPG. Were they trying to compete with World of Warcraft? Was the MMO going to destroy conventional tabletop RPGs? Wizards of the Coast wanted to get new players. They wanted to appeal to the MMO World of Warcraft player. Now, I couldn't find any articles or anything that specifically states that Wizards of the Coast was targeting this MMO market, nor that they intended D&D to feel more like a video game. However, the consensus with a lot of the fans is that they did. For many tabletop role players, 4th edition felt like a tabletop MMO, focused on combat, tactics, and gearing up, less on story. Traditional fans of 3rd edition and AD&D didn't really care to play a video game at a table. The game was changed from the ground up. Spells and abilities were replaced with powers. Every class had powers, so every class was essentially easier to balance with one another and appealed to more people. Characters were played essentially the same way to encourage players to try different classes. No longer would a fighter be left in the dust to an all-powerful wizard. A rogue would use their stealthy sneak stabby powers, and a sorcerer could use their produce fireball powers. But every character had essentially a few at-will powers, abilities they could use anytime, encounter powers, abilities they could use once per fight, and daily powers, which would be used only once a day or long rest. This put many of the characters on the same playing field, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, fighters want to feel powerful at level 20 just like a wizard does. Combat was very tactical. As new books came out, more powers were released that would shape the battlefield, making miniatures and a battle map key to playing. However, many people played 3.5 in earlier editions using Theater of the Mind. They didn't want to invest in miniatures. A general description of the battlefield should have been enough for a few friends to roll some dice and play an RPG. Many players enjoyed the new system for eliminating DM rulings in favor of Wizards of the Coast or, quote, official rulings. DMs and players couldn't agree on how far away a monster was, or where a monster was pushed, or how many hit points it had. All of these were very mathematically scripted out. Many 3.5 players had invested heavily into that game and were sad to see D&D coming out with a new system so quickly. Those players wanted Wizards of the Coast to update 3.5 to something like 3.75, which would fix a few more rules then completely overhaul the game. If you play 5th edition, at this point you can kind of see the lessons they learned from both 3.5 and 4th edition when creating 5e. A new emphasis on story, using Dungeons & Dragons to allow people to tell a unique story. The rules are important but flexible. I myself play with miniatures, but there have been times, narratively, it just works out better to have a theater of the mind and see where the dice take us. I'm thinking back to every underwater combat I've ever ran. 4E ran a lot like a video game, and people often use the term it was codified. Lore-wise, 4E shunned a bunch of their player base too. 4th edition came up with a new creation myth, a war with the primordials and the gods existing up in the astral sea and the primordials existing down in the elemental chaos. Primordials created the Shadowfell and the Feywild from the prime material plane. Certain iconic monsters or locations were now tied to this new mythology. The elves came from the Feywild, and Barovia was just part of the Shadowfell. The plane of shadow was now kind of the Shadowfell all along, and it just confused players. But that was just general D&D lore. Now we get into some of the Forgotten Realms specific stuff. Wizards of the Coast wanted to combine older lore with their new creation story. They wanted to explain new races and a new magic system put in place in the core mechanics of D&D. They did this with the previous mentioned creation story and the Spellplague. You can learn more about the Spellplague in the link above, but in short, Mystra, the goddess of magic, was murdered in 1385 DR at the hands of Cyric, which was engineered by Shar. With her, the weave was torn apart and magic ceased to exist how we know it. It was 10 years of blue magical fire that tore across Faerun, reshaping it, bringing with it parts of Abir, a lost world, and thus the Dragonborn. The Feywild, which was new to 4th edition, was explained as always being there, but now very accessible via the prime material plane. It was called the Realm of Faerie back in the day. Savras died, Azuth was devoured, Lathander turned into a Minotaur, Cyric was imprisoned for his crime, the World Tree was destroyed, and whole sections of Faerun were changed geographically. The Sea of Fallen Stars shrunk, being dumped into the Underdark, Mulhorand was completely destroyed, and the Mulhorandi pantheon disappeared. As I go over again, I'm not sure why Wizards of the Coast wanted such dramatic, sudden, and intense changes to the Forgotten Realms. Maybe they felt it would shake things up. But with deities changing or dying, geography rearranging, spells not working like they used to, and parts of Faerun burning under blue fire, nobody felt like it was the realms they grew up with. The past books, the stories people loved, were now changed forever, and while people don't usually like change, rather than trying to remember what happened in the realms, it was now easier just to play it during the 3.5 era. By 1395 DR, most of the devastating effects of the Spellplague ended, but Faerun was changed. And by 1480 DR, Wizards of the Coast, with 5th edition, invented the Second Sundering, returning most of what happened back to its 3.5 era, rewinding the clock in a way. The events had occurred, they still took place, but the fallout was no more. Deities were resurrected, the Sea of Fallen Stars refilled, magic went back to the way it was before, the weave restored along with Mystra. If you plan on playing 4th edition or any RPG really, you might need some miniatures, or better yet, tactical tokens. Tactical Tokens has a Kickstarter currently in progress where you can grab yourself some token style game pieces for your tabletop games. They are durable and spill resistant. In fact, you can even use dry erase markers on them to indicate status effects. Flip them over from color to black and white to show fallen characters. It's a great tactical option for your D&D game, and the art they've licensed has some great monsters and player character options. Check out their Kickstarter today. They have a variety of pledge levels so you can get the set amount of tokens you're looking for. If you supply your own art, they can even craft some custom tokens for your game. I believe that any RPG, you can tell a good story if you have the right people. If you have role players who want to play, even 4th edition wouldn't stop you. I think in remembering all the hate that editions get, it's important to remember that 4th edition was someone's gateway into D&D. It was their first experience, and they probably had a blast with it, pretending to be a Dragonborn paladin fighting an evil beholder. I don't think the game was bad so much as people were holding on to nostalgia. That's probably an unpopular opinion, but people don't like change. I'd be very curious with the success of 5th edition how Wizards of the Coast handles a 6th edition. If they release basically the same system, they'll get crap for not being innovative enough. However, if they rewrite D&D like they did between 3.5 and 4E, well, we all know how that turned out. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you in the next video.